Hello and good morning. My name is Dean Bonner. I am the Associate Survey Director and a Research Fellow at the Public Policy Institute of California. Welcome to our virtual program today, featuring the findings of our latest PPIC statewide survey on Californians and their government. The survey that we're talking about today was supported with funding from the RJR and Francis F. Miller Foundation, and today's event is supported with generous funding from the PPIC Corporate Circle and the PPIC Donor Circle. We thank them both for their support. For today's program, my colleague Lauren Mora will walk through some of the findings from this survey, and then we will discuss a few key takeaways before answering questions from the audience. If you have a question, please send it along with your name and organization to the email address on the screen, ppiceventquestions@gmail.com. As a reminder, PPIC is a public charity and does not take or support positions on any ballot measures or legislation, nor does it support, endorse, or oppose any political parties or candidates for public office. I'd like to now welcome my colleague, survey analyst Lauren Mora.
Thank you so much, Dean, for the introduction. And please give me one moment while I share my screen. Hello, good morning. Thank you all for joining us today, and thank you so much for your interest in our work. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge my co-authors on this report, which includes Dean, as well as Survey Director Mark Baldessari and Survey Analyst Deja Thomas. I would also like to acknowledge our funders for this survey, the RJR and Francis F. Miller Foundation. Without their generous support, this work would not be possible. This survey is part of our Californians and their government surveys, which is now in its 27th year. This survey has covered numerous local, state, national, and international issues since 1998. The mission of the PPIC statewide survey is to provide timely, relevant, nonpartisan data on political, social, and economic opinions, which we hope will then be used to help inform and improve policymaking and encourage discussions. This particular survey was conducted online from February 4th through the 11th using the Ipsos Knowledge Panel. Interviews were conducted in either English or Spanish according to the respondent preferences. And our sample includes 1,589 California adults. And of that total sample, we identified 1,086 respondents as likely voters. The margin of error is 3.2 for adults and 3.7 for likely voters. So now to dive into some findings. When asked to choose from a list of issues, 3 in 10 Californians chose political extremism or threats to democracy as the most important problem facing the US today. Overall, likely voters are even more likely at 42% to choose this as the top problem. Additionally, about 2 in 10 adults chose economic conditions, including jobs and unemployment, and 15% chose immigration. Interestingly, responses have shifted compared to our October pre-election survey. In that survey, the top issue was economy at 26%, which today we see a 7-point decrease, while threats to democracy was at 18%, or 13 points lower than it is today. Today, Democrats and independents are much more likely than Republicans to choose political extremism or threats to democracy. And in fact, about half of Democrats chose this as the top problem facing the US. Meanwhile, the top issue among Republicans was immigration. In an open-ended question asking Californians what the most important issue for the governor and legislature to work on in 2025, California adults and likely voters both named cost of living and economic conditions as the top issue. This was followed by housing issues and then environmental issues, including wildfires and water supply. Across parties, cost of living was the top issue mentioned, but independents are the most likely to name this. On the other hand, Democrats are more likely than others to name housing as the top issue for the state government to work on, while Republicans are more likely to name immigration. Notably, cost of living and economic conditions were the top issue among most regions and demographic groups in the state. Overall, majorities of Californians say both the state and the country are going in the wrong direction, though they are less pessimistic about the state of the state. 54% of adults and 51% of likely voters think things in the state are generally headed in the wrong direction. But this share is actually slightly down from October when 60% of adults said the same thing. Today, 7 in 10 Democrats say the state is going in the right direction, while 9 in 10 Republicans and 6 in 10 independents say wrong direction. Regarding the country, about 3 in 4 adults and likely voters say the US is generally headed in the wrong direction. This overall share has actually increased slightly from October when that share was 69%. And overwhelming majorities of Democrats and independents say the country is generally headed in the wrong direction, compared to only about a third of Republicans. Turning to approval of elected officials. A majority of Californians approve of the job Governor Newsom is doing, and about half approve of the legislature. However, regarding federal officials, only 30% approve of the job Donald Trump is doing as president, and only 20% approve of the US Congress. As you can see with the blue bars, Democrats are much more approving than Republicans regarding the state government officials, while Republicans, which you can see in the red bars, are much more likely to approve of federal officials. Independents are somewhat in the middle of the two, but lean towards disapproval. When asked about confidence in Donald Trump to make the right decisions for the country's future, a majority say they have no confidence at all. Only 28% of California adults have a great deal or a good amount of confidence in Trump to make the right decisions for the country, and 17% have some confidence. Among partisans, 83% of Republicans say they have a great deal or a good amount of confidence, while 8 in 10 Democrats and 57% of independents have no confidence at all. Majorities across most regions and demographic groups say they have no confidence at all in Trump's decision-making, and this is highest among African Americans and residents in the San Francisco Bay Area and Los Angeles. Relatedly, about 3 in 4 or more across all regions and demographic groups think the country will be divided under Trump over the next 4 years. We asked respondents if they favor or oppose the California state government making its own policy separate from the federal government to address the issue of climate change, as well as for protecting the legal rights of undocumented immigrants in California. About 6 in 10 adults and likely voters support the state government making separate policies on these two issues. This includes over 8 in 10 Democrats and 6 in 10 independents. However, most Republicans oppose this idea. Majorities across all regions and demographic groups support the state making their own policies on both of these issues. 6 in 10 Californians say the federal government is not doing enough to address climate change. About 2 in 10 say just enough, but only 16% say the federal government is doing more than enough. 85% of Democrats and 6 in 10 independents say not enough is being done to address climate change. Conversely, about half of Republicans say more than enough is being done. And half or more across regions and demographic groups say not enough is being done. And relatedly, 7 in 10 Californians oppose Trump's decision to withdraw from the International Paris Climate Agreement. And majorities across all regions and demographic groups oppose this decision. When it comes to how to handle undocumented immigrants who are living in the US, about 7 in 10 adults and likely voters say that there should be a way for them to stay in the country legally if certain conditions are met. And this share is actually higher in January 2021 at the start of Biden's presidency when 87% of Californians said this. Today, partisans are highly divided on this issue. 9 in 10 Democrats and 7 in 10 independents say that there should be a way for undocumented immigrants to stay, compared to only 4 in 10 Republicans who say the same. Shifting gears, as we all know, earlier this year, Los Angeles and the surrounding areas suffered a series of wildfires, thus making wildfires resources a major discussion in this state. And today, 46% of Californians say wildfires are a big problem in their part of California, and about a third say they are somewhat of a problem. Notably, 53% of residents in Los Angeles and the Inland Empire say wildfires are a big problem, and which is higher than other regions. Despite these levels of concerns, Californians express relatively low levels of confidence in the government's readiness to respond to wildfires in their part of California. Only 3 in 10 say they have a great deal of confidence, while about half say they have only some, and 1 in 5 say hardly any confidence. Across regions and demographic groups, a third or less say they have a great deal of confidence. Notably, only 27% of Los Angeles residents have a great deal of confidence in the government's readiness to respond to wildfires, which is actually down from 35% last July. On another topic, we also asked about the state budget. As announced in January, Governor Newsom proposed a budget plan for the next fiscal year that includes $229 billion in general fund spending and a $363 million surplus. After reading a short summary of the governor's budget proposal, about 6 in 10 Californians are in favor and 4 in 10 oppose. A bipartisan divide exists on the budget, with 8 in 10 Democrats and half Republicans in favor, while 8 in 10 Democrats and half of independents in favor, while most Republicans opposed. Half or more across regions and nearly all demographic groups support the budget plan. An overwhelming share of Californians favor the governor's proposal to use $2.7 billion to implement Proposition 4, the multi-year climate bond passed last November. This plan includes funding water-related programs as well as resources for wildfires and forests. 7 in 10 Californians support this plan, and there is strong majority support among Democrats and independents, compared to only about 4 in 10 Republicans. There is also strong majority support across regions and demographic groups. Our survey covered other topics as well, and some of them are listed here. As you can see, there's economic outlook for the state and the US, satisfaction with democracy, and US immigration policies, to name a few. I would encourage you all to take a look at the report, survey report, crosstabs, and time trends available on our website. And there is a possibility that we will have some blogs on some of these topics, so please be on the lookout for those. Before I bring Dean back to discuss key takeaways for the survey, I want to remind everyone that we will begin audience questions in just a few minutes. If you have a question for us, please email it to the email address on the screen, ppiceventquestions@gmail.com, and please be sure to include your name and your organization. This concludes my presentation, and I will stop sharing and bring back Dean for key takeaways.
Hi, Lauren. Thanks so much for that great presentation. And I would echo Lauren's thoughts about going online to look at the crosstabs and the time trends on your own, because there's just a ton of information in the survey. I'm going to try to supplement some of what Lauren talked about, but there's even more than what I'm able to talk about in the allotted time. So I would definitely encourage everyone to go online and look at the report. Now, I want to begin discussing some of Californians' views towards immigrants and immigration policy. Immigration is an important issue for California because, as you may know, California is home to 10.6 million immigrants, accounting for 1/5 of the foreign-born population nationwide. And additionally, 27% of California's population was born outside of the US, and that's higher than any other state and more than double the rest of the country. And thus, how Californians view immigrants and immigration policy is especially important. Today, we find that 7 in 10 Californians, including 6 in 10 or more across demographic groups and regions, think that immigrants are a benefit to California because of their hard work and job skills. It's notable that the share holding this view has bounced back after reaching a record high 78% in January 2021 and then subsequently declining somewhat. Today, we've actually seen a 12-point jump from last February, when 60% viewed immigrants positively. This increase can be seen across parties, where perceptions went up 18 points among independents, 14 points among Democrats, and 8 points among Republicans. Additionally, there have been increases across all regions and demographic groups. And in many cases, those increases have been double-digit increases in the share of viewing immigrants positively compared to a year ago. Notably, the share increased most in the Central Valley, where it went up 17 points. It went up 14 points among whites, 14 points among Californians with higher incomes of 80,000 or more, and 13 points among Californians 18 to 34. So generally speaking, we've seen this large shift towards a much more positive view towards immigrants. And that's from already a very high standpoint in most cases. And when it comes to support for immigration policy, Lauren mentioned support for undocumented immigrants being able to stay in the U.S. if certain requirements are met, and support for state action to protect immigrants. But we also find strong, and in this case, bipartisan support for the DACA program, which gives protections for certain immigrants who were brought to the U.S. as children. And if we take a look at the policy under the new administration, we find majority opposition for declaring a national emergency at the border, for ending birthright citizenship, as well as ending asylum and entirely closing the border. On all of these new Trump administration policies, Californians are much more likely than adults nationwide to oppose these policies. And I was curious, Lauren, if there was anything from these immigration findings that really kind of surprised you, or anything you would want to add.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that even though we do see some variance in support for certain programs or certain views towards immigrants, overall, it is really important to know that they do see strong majority either support for immigrants or, strong sentiments of positivity towards immigrants. So even though there is that sort of differences in groups, overall, it's really not that big of a difference considering there is solid or strong majority support for a lot of these questions. And I think that's really important to emphasize in California.
Yeah, that's very true, is that almost entirely across all of these groups, with the exception in some cases among Republicans, but across regions and demographic groups, there's strong support. Yeah, so that's very important. Yeah. And kind of looking beyond perceptions of immigrants and support for policy, we found that 1 in 5 Californians today worry a lot that someone they know could be deported, and another 1 in 5 say they worry at least some. This perception is held by nearly 4 in 10 Latinos, who worry a lot about someone they know being deported. And this perception is higher among those with only a high school education and those making less than $40,000 a year. And I would like to just add that it's notable that on all of these questions about immigrants and immigration policy, we find that Californians who say at least one of their parents were born outside of the U.S. are more likely to hold views supportive of immigrants. And this is especially the case for respondents who said both of their parents were born outside of the U.S. And so shifting away from immigration to President Trump, with President Trump back in the White House, I wanted to at least talk a little bit about how his approval today compares to his last approval ratings in October 2020 that we had for him, as well as the first approval ratings that we had for him in January 2017. As Lauren mentioned, President Trump begins his second term in office with 30% approval. That's actually 5 points lower than his last approval rating in October 2020. And it's exactly the same as his first approval rating all the way back in January 2017. However, while his approval today is the same as his first approval, there are some notable subgroup differences. For example, approval today is 12 points higher among Republicans than it was in January 2017, and it's 9 points lower among independents. And when we look at race and ethnicity, there's a lot of discussion about African Americans and Latinos being more supportive of President Trump in the most recent election. And we find his approval ratings among these groups have increased 6 and 5 points respectively since January 2017. It is notable that his approval is actually down 11 points among Asian Americans, and that outside of party and race, there aren't large changes compared to how Californians initially viewed President Trump in 2017. And so I do think that it's kind of interesting and just kind of noteworthy that he's kind of starting back where he began, despite the fact that he did see some increases in his approval as he went through his last term. And so it will be interesting to see. I would add that Californians are kind of pessimistic about the thought that President Trump and Congress would be able to work together and get a lot accomplished, with just 4 in 10 Californians saying that. And that's compared to nearly or about 6 in 10 who think Governor Newsom and the legislature will be able to work together. And that's kind of interesting given that both kind of leaders have the full support of their party in terms of majorities in both the houses at the state and both houses or both chambers in DC. So to me, that really stuck out. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about California's views towards democracy. Today, we find that a third of Californians are very or somewhat satisfied with the way democracy is working in the US, while 2 in 3 are not at all satisfied. Satisfaction is actually at a record low today. And in fact, it has dropped 20 points since 53% of Californians were satisfied in January 2022, which was the first time we asked this question. And notably, we have seen satisfaction with democracy drop 10 points among adults and 12 points among likely voters just since 4 months ago in October. Partisan views of democracy has drastically changed, with satisfaction among Democrats plummeting 37 points since October, while Republican satisfaction saw a rise of 33 points. And so today, just 18% of Democrats are satisfied with democracy, while 68% are satisfied among Republicans. And this view is unchanged among independents. Outside of party, there were noticeable declines in satisfaction in kind of more liberal areas of San Francisco Bay Area, where there was a 19-point decline, and Los Angeles, where there was a 16-point decline. There were also double-digit declines among African Americans, Asian Americans, and Latinos, as well as Californians with incomes of $40,000 and higher, and among those who are younger at 18 to 34, as well as those who are 55 and older. And lastly, I would just like to add that, there's been no change in satisfaction among men, while satisfaction of democracy in the US among women has actually declined 11 points since just 4 months ago. And so this is definitely a feeling that has been kind of seen not only in this question, but as Lauren mentioned, we have 3 in 10 Californians saying that, or choosing democracy or threats to democracy or political extremism as the top issue. And we've also seen big changes in that as well, where we've seen, 22-point jump among Democrats selecting this, as Lauren said, as well as 20-point increases among African Americans and Latinos, as well as double-digit increases among most regions and demographic groups. So, Lauren, it seems like the idea of kind of democracy and threats to democracy is really a a kind of dividing issue partisan wise, while there seems to be more agreement outside of parties.
I agree, yes. And I also want to highlight another question we asked this survey. It was our first time asking how much confidence Californians have in the future of the US political system, which I think is highly tied to this question. And we found that about a quarter have no confidence or no trust in the future of the US political system, which is, it's our first reading on this, so it'll be interesting to see if this grows or if this declines. But about a quarter say they have none at all. 4 in 10 say not too much. So overwhelming majority of Californians say they have not too much or not at all confidence in the future of the US political system, which is pretty starking when you think about this rise in this dissatisfaction in democracy. And just to finish out the question, about 3 in 10 have some confidence, and less than 1 in 10 have a lot of confidence in the future of the US political system.
Yeah, I'll be definitely interested in kind of tracking this question over time to see if it kind of improves or if it kind of continues to, or if it declines. And so thanks for mentioning that. I would love to talk more with you as we could probably spend another hour talking, but I would like for us to kind of move ahead to the question and answer stage. At this point, as a reminder, you can submit your questions to PPIC event questions at gmail.com. And it looks like we do have a couple of questions already in. The first question is, did your survey find any notable regional differences in how Californians think about immigration and potential immigration policies? Do you want to take the lead on this one?
I'll take the lead on this one. So I would say overall, from what I saw in a very general sense, that residents in the San Francisco Bay Area and LA County tend to have warmer feelings towards immigrants and immigration policies. Though, as we said earlier, Californians overall tend to have more positive views of immigrants. And Dean mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I do suspect some of that might be due to personal connections with immigration. Dean mentioned how we have the largest share of immigrants in the country, but even more so in LA County and several counties in the Bay Area, at least 1/3 of the population is a foreign-born person. And according to this survey, 52% of Los Angeles residents worry at least some about someone they know someone they know might be deported, which is higher than other regions. So again, suspecting there might be a personal connection there. The San Francisco Bay Area and Los Angeles also have slightly higher shares of residents who say immigrants are a benefit to California than other regions. I believe 78% of those in San Francisco said this, and the Inland Empire was actually the lowest at 64%, so still solid support, but different levels of support. And residents in Los Angeles and the San Francisco Bay Area also have larger shares who say they support the state government making policy separate from the federal government to protect undocumented immigrants. And I would say one more thing about Los Angeles, notably 8 in 10 Los Angeles residents say there should be a way for undocumented immigrants to stay legally, which is higher than all other regions, including San Francisco. When it comes to more specific policies proposed by the Trump administration, we also saw the lowest levels of support among residents in Los Angeles and the San Francisco Bay Area. Although for the most part, we saw majorities oppose across regions regarding these policies. But just to give a few examples of levels of support or opposition, about a quarter of residents in LA support ending the automatic granting of citizenship to children born to undocumented immigrants. So that was about 25% compared to 34% in the Central Valley and Inland Empire and 39% in Orange County, San Diego. And I will say, notice one key thing that people agree on, and that is DACA that Dean mentioned. And I believe overwhelming majorities, like 3 and 4 across regions, do express support for DACA, which is really notable.
Yeah, that's kind of the one thing I was kind of looking through my crosstabs as you were talking, and that really does stand out, the fact that, DACA is a program that has, not only, as I mentioned, bipartisan support, but this high level of support across regions. And so that to me has always been very interesting. And so for question two, it looks like from our audience is that what do you think is driving the increased job approval ratings for both Governor Newsom and the state legislature? I can take a crack at this. I did see a lot of talk on Twitter or X or whatnot about kind of, like the rise in Newsom's approval. And as always, there's kind of some back and forth about this. But to me, it was, I'm not sure, the budget which was released, there was a modest surplus. So, maybe that's something. And there was some kind of holding the line on some policies that I think are kind of popular when it comes to education and other areas. The Prop 4 funds, I'm sure a lot of people were happy with that. But I did, as I was kind of up last night, kind of making graphics for Twitter or whatnot, I did kind of look at Newsom's approval specifically, and I did notice that it was noteworthy that his approval in Los Angeles went up 11 points since October, which to me is notable. It might speak to how they think he performed regarding the fires, or it may just be kind of related to, the special session he called regarding kind of Trump proofing Trump proofing California. But yeah, other areas where he saw a big increase were a 14-point increase among Latinos since October, a 10-point increase among Democrats. And I do kind of wonder if part of this is leaders being judged relative to others. And so perhaps Californians are looking at Governor Newsom and not comparing per se, but almost like, well, we think that President Newsom is doing a better job than President Trump with just 3 in 10 approval. So perhaps that's playing a role. But I was kind of surprised that his overall approval did go up 8 points, and so that to me was kind of surprising. Did you see anything on that maybe
No, you
help explain?
highlighted the things that really caught my eye was just the Los Angeles number and the Latino number. But yeah, I also have the kind of feeling that people are feeling a bit unstable when it comes to the country as a whole. Even when we look at the direction of the country versus the state, people are less pessimistic about the state than the country. So my thought is maybe people are just maybe relying more on the state government than the federal government. But it'll be interesting to see as the Trump administration continues throughout the year if this is a trend that continues or
Yeah.
goes back to what it was.
Yeah, I will note that, his approval last year overall, it tied a record low in
Yeah.
October of 44%,
Mhm.
but it was lower last year across the board than basically any time from 2023 going all the way back to kind of the late aughts. And so he had a really good run of approval that was around 55, 56, 54% on a regular basis. Then last year there was just this big downturn. And so now it's kind of bounced back, and we'll have to see where he is later this year when we go back into the field. So we have another question. This one is about wildfires. It says, the survey shows that in the wake of the LA fires, the share of Californians saying wildfires are a big problem in their part of the state has increased since last summer. What does the long-term trend like on wildfire concerns?
I can start with this one. So we actually started first asking this question in March 2019. So over the last 6 years or so, we have seen that share saying the threat of wildfires is a big problem fluctuate between 39% and 55%, depending on the survey. We saw the highest share who say the threat of wildfires is a big problem in July of 2021. That was when 55% held this view. But that number fell to below 50% from 2022 through 2024 and hit a low last July at 39%. But as we know, that number increased to 7 points to 46% as of today. And something that I've noticed in regional differences, because this question is asked specifically about people's areas of California. So I think that's an important thing to note too is, for example, when we saw that high of 55% in July 2021, the San Francisco Bay Area residents actually had the largest share who said wildfires were a big problem at that point in their part of the state. And this happened to be the first reading after the SCU lighting complex fires in the Bay around the Bay Area, and I believe the glass fire in Napa. But on the other hand, that year, the Central Valley had the lowest share in that survey. However, last July, when we saw that low of 39%, the largest share among regions was actually the Central Valley, and the lowest was San Francisco. Today, the largest shares are unsurprisingly in Los Angeles and the Inland Empire, with San Francisco having the lowest share. So obviously, the shifts largely reflect like major fire incidents across the state in whichever year we're asking, which does make a lot of sense, but it's also really interesting to see the data kind of reflect real life. And yeah, so it fluctuates on whatever happening, I would say.
Yeah, I do think that that's very important, the kind of in your part of California element of that question. And I had also, as we were kind of thinking about blogs and whatnot, I was looking back to see kind of how the more recent fires ranked, kind of, there's always the list of kind of the largest fires or the most deadly fires or whatnot. And yeah, and I was also trying to kind of triangulate like how does this work? And there is this impact between kind of the regional differences, but not as much when it comes to kind of large like the state views, right? Like there isn't quite that kind of, like just because there was a fire in Santa Rosa doesn't mean that people in Los Angeles are going to necessarily view as a big problem in their area. And so, yeah. Um, Another question we have is the survey shows that state and national economies are top of mind for Californians. Yeah, top two in both cases. What do your findings say about California's outlook for the economy? Um, I can talk about this specifically. I tweeted this last night. I think looking at kind of how Californians' views towards the U.S. economy have shifted since October. And this is something we often see, and we're actually seeing it at the national level, that there's a big sea change when it comes to how partisans view the economic outlook when there's a change at the top of government. And in this case, we've actually seen in the share saying that they expect bad economic times in the U.S., we've actually seen a 12-point increase among all adults and a 17-point increase among likely voters. But where you really see the change is this 46-point increase among Democrats and a 47-point decline among Republicans, thinking that bad economic times are ahead. And so I do think that a lot of this kind of views are driven by party, but there are some wide differences that we've seen compared to October, where African Americans have increased 24 points, 19 points among Latinos, 16 points among Asian Americans, as well as in the more liberal areas of the state. 24 points in the Bay Area and 20 points in Los Angeles, increases in the share saying bad economic times. And so I do think that this kind of this connection between partisan views and regarding who the president is really impacts this. And this is something, if you recall, we had talked about even before the survey had even launched, that that was something we wanted to look at. And so as we thought, it kind of came to fruition, sadly, I guess, that this many people are pessimistic about that economic outlook. But we'll continue asking the question and kind of seeing if some of this initial shock will wear off, or if because of what's happening there, it actually potentially worsens. And so we'll just have to see. But do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I think you answered that very thoroughly and well.
Yeah, it's something, these are my late night musings of when I'm kind of, like the kids are asleep and I'm just,
Great.
thinking about the survey. And yes, I'm not much of a nerd, but I wear it as a badge of honor. And so, at this time, we've reached the end of our program, Lauren. So I thank you for your presentation and for the back and forth here. It's been really great. And I would also like to thank our funders, the RJR and Francis F. Miller Foundation, and the PPIC corporate and donor circles. And of course, thanks to all of you for joining us today. We would appreciate you taking a moment to give us your feedback on this event. If you pre-registered for this event, you'll receive an email later today with a link to a short survey, but you can also scan the QR code on your screen right now. And finally, a recording of today's event will be available soon on the PPIC website and our YouTube channel, so you can watch it again or share it with your colleagues. I would like to thank everyone for joining us today, and I hope that you have a good afternoon and a great rest of your morning. Thank you.